Hi, I'm Susan Freeman. Welcome back to our Propertyshe podcast series brought to you by Mishcon Rare in association with the London Real Estate Forum, where I get to interview the key influencers in the world of real estate and the built environment. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Brad Hargreaves. Brad is the founder and CEO of Common, America's leading residential brand that designs and manages multifamily apartments with more than 5,000 residents in over 10 markets across the country. Before founding Common in early 2015, Brad was a co-founder of General Assembly, a global education institution with campuses in more than 15 cities worldwide. As part of the General Assembly founding team, Brad led the growth of the company's education business from its launch in 2011 into a global institution with over a dozen campuses. Most recently, he was a venture partner at Maveron, General Assembly's lead investor. Brad has been named as Ernst & Young's 2020 Entrepreneur of the Year, Vanity Fair's The Next Establishment, Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30, Business Insider's Silicon Alley 100, and Crane's 2017 40 Under 40. And now we're going to hear from serial entrepreneur Brad Hargreaves about his rapidly expanding co-living business, Common, his plans for future growth, and what he's learnt along the way. Brad, hi. So thank you for joining us today. I think you're talking to us from New York.
I am, yes. Thank you, Susan, for having me on.
So we're going to be talking about your co-living business, Common, but before you get started, could you just tell the listeners just a little bit about you, where you grew up, whether you always planned to become a serial entrepreneur, and how things got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So as much as what we're doing at Common today is about cities, I certainly did not grow up in a city. I grew up in the rural South, Southern Arkansas in the United States. And, you know, I went to college in the Northeast, moved to New York City, and, you know, began my love of cities and of what cities can bring to people and can bring to communities. And, you know, that naturally led into the businesses I've started in my career. You know, most notably, about 12 years ago, I co-founded a business called General Assembly, which became the largest trade school in the US, focused on teaching topics like web development, user experience design, data science, really bridging that gap between skills that are taught in university and what's needed in the workforce today. So today we do about 30,000 students a year. We sold that business a handful of years ago to Adecco Group, a large global staffing firm. And I've been focused on Common day to day for the past 5 years. And Common originated very organically out of that, of seeing some of the housing crisis that faces major cities today.
Yeah, that's great. And is it true that you are a big advocate of boredom? Because when you were growing up in Arkansas, there wasn't that much to do, and you had a chance to do some blue sky thinking.
Yeah, I you know, certainly spent a lot of time playing around with computers. And, you know, I would say I did grow up in a very rural, very isolated area. You know, we packed up the car once a week to drive to the grocery store, which was, you know, about an hour away. So it was, you know, it was in some ways isolating as a kid, but also gave me a lot of time to think, to experiment with technology. And, you know, I think I have two young boys myself now, age 2 and 4. And I think a lot about, you know, not over programming their lives and giving them some time to, you know, be creative, to explore, you know, tougher in New York City where there's a lot going on to replicate that. But I think a lot about that and the level of programming that we have in kids' lives today.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because we probably try to fill our own lives and our children's lives with just so many activities, so that nobody misses out on anything. So, you what was the opportunity that that you saw when you started Common? What what was missing? What wasn't being done?
Well, General Assembly was a school, so we brought not just students but also instructors and employees to cities where we had our campuses where we offered our classes. We were primarily brick and mortar. We had and today have a large online component, but we had a lot of people moving to places like New York. We have the second city we expanded to was London, so we had a big UK presence as well. But like New York, London, San Francisco, DC, those were our largest campuses. And we had people moving there, and they wouldn't often look for an apartment, they would look for a room in a shared suite, often on Craigslist or some roommate matching app. And it was a pretty rough experience. Some people were lucky and found great people and a quality place to live. Others had nightmare stories. So we looked at this, and there's in the U.S. alone, there's 25 million people who live with roommates, who share a home or apartment with someone they're not related to. And I think it's broadly representative of some of the challenges that face the housing sector. Specifically, there's really a gap between a lot of what's being built and what's needed, specifically on the affordability side, where there's a real need for attainable housing and not enough of it being built. And so broadly, we started Common to address that gap, to focus housing on, from a user experience, from a product standpoint, on what's really needed, to be thoughtful about design, and then from a consumer standpoint, to really build a more affordable, a more convenient kind of housing, starting with co-living, starting with, we look at co-living as roommates done better, keeping the good parts, the social environment, and the affordability, but getting rid of as many of the annoyances as we can control through cleaning, through providing shared kitchen and bathroom supplies, through splitting the bills for them. So that's really how we got into Common, got into residential real estate, and today we have about 6,000 units under management and around 20,000 signed and under development in 28 cities.
So a common development, one would expect smaller bedrooms with great sort of shared living spaces, and how, just for the benefit of our listeners who don't know Common, I mean, are there any operators in the UK, for instance, that are similar to what you're doing, or does it not exist?
Yeah, so co-living takes different manifestations in different cities based on culture, based on history, based on building code. So in every city, it takes somewhat of a different form. In the US, what we typically see are shared apartments, where you have multiple private bedrooms, usually with private bathrooms. The bedrooms are quite big. They can actually be larger in many cases than you would have in a comparable traditional apartment. But there are more of them, and they open into a shared kitchen and living area. So that's a typical model in most cities in the United States. In the UK, when most people talk about co-living, they're really talking about micro apartments. So smaller apartments with a little kitchenette, little bathroom that open up into a corridor. And you have many of those in a hallway, and perhaps there's more amenities in the building, there's more programming in the building. So generally, there's some definitional changes, and there are certain cities in the U.S. Where there are micro units, and those are prevalent, such as Seattle. We manage about 800 micro apartments in the city of Seattle. But in general, micro apartments are rare in the United States. And so in the UK, for instance, the Collective is probably the largest operator. Reza Merchant is founder and CEO there. They're a bit different than we are. Happy to get into those details, in that they're a vertically integrated owner, developer, operator, whereas we are really focused on the operational side, and we work with third-party owners and developers. So we're set up in different ways, and I think some of the differences in the residential industry in the countries drove that difference.
So it's interesting you mentioned the collective and being vertically integrated, because it seems very much in the UK, when you look across the whole picture on build to rent and co-living, the developers tend to develop and operate. So do you develop, or is that something that you're not interested in getting involved in?
We don't. We've made a strategic decision that we're not going to do our own developments. We would view that as competing with our customers, competing with our clients. So that's more of a typical business strategy in the United States. The build to rent sector in the U.S. Is approximately 50 to 60 million apartments. It's a massive sector. It's been around for many, many decades. There are established third-party property managers. The largest third-party property manager in the U.S. is Greystar. More people live in Greystar than live in the city of San Francisco, just to give you a sense of the scale of some of these operators. So it's much more established in many ways in the States. I would argue that there are a lot of ways to do that management better. It hasn't changed a lot since the 1980s in terms of how it's done. And I'm happy to talk about some of what we're doing on the build to rent side as a whole. In the UK, build to rent is much more nascent, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But you don't have really established third-party property managers in much of the same way. So when developers in the build-to-rent sector say, hey, we're going to roll out a strategy of building, amenitized rental buildings in, top 5 UK cities or onto the continent, they almost always vertically integrate and say they're going to do their own management as well. There are a few exceptions, but generally we see them self-managing. They're just not that many good third-party managers in Europe right now, and I include the UK in that. I believe that's going to change. I mean, in the US, you saw the separation of development and management decades ago, as developers said, we're going to focus on the development side, we're going to focus on the asset management side. We don't want to get tied up in the weeds of property management, and many developers are subscale. And really, to build a property management company, you need to be managing many thousands, if not tens of thousands of units to get economies of scale. It's very tough to scale a development firm that far, much easier to get that scale on the management side. So
you are absolutely right about describing our build to rent sector as nascent. It's I think just over 10 years really, since we got started, and it's taken a long time for units to come out of the ground. So you were talking about how to do it better. So I think it's probably as a good point at which to talk about how you do it better, because you are taking over buildings that are owned by big property companies and investors, and you obviously are able to come in and increase the efficiency and productivity. How do you do that?
Yeah, so there are a few different methods that we use to improve the returns on rental assets. One is coming and bringing a brand. One thing we noticed in the early days of Common is that there are really no middle market residential brands. There are very high-end residential brands like Related, Equity Residential, Avalon Bay, that do a great job marketing to a luxury tenant. But there's really nothing that is, I don't want to say that the Southwest Airlines. I don't know if that I don't know if that analogy translates to the UK, but high quality and affordable. There's nothing in that middle market tier where someone graduating from school, someone who is, has just got a job in a city and has 2 weeks to move, says, hey, I'm just going to move into the common because I know it's going to be high quality. I know my toilet's going to get fixed. I know what I'm going to get, and it's affordable. And that middle market brand is really what we set out to build with Common. And we really measure that by how many people are coming and applying to Common directly through our website. So not through a booking site or through a listing site. And today that's about 25,000 people a month come and book a tour or request to live at Common directly through our website. And that number is growing anywhere from 5 to 10% per month. So we're really focused on how do we build that dedicated consumer brand that makes it so much more efficient on the marketing side, enables faster lease ups. The second is centralized operations and the role that technology can play in that. Residential real estate management today is still very decentralized. Pretty much everything that happens at a building operationally happens physically by people sitting at that building. That makes sense for some things, such as repairs and maintenance, such as fundamentals of property management. It doesn't make sense for a lot of other things. Inside sales, responding to leads, scheduling tours, lease administration, doing credit checks. There are a lot of things that don't make sense to happen at a building. We centralize that, and when you centralize it, you're able to automate a lot of those tasks and make those tasks happen more efficiently and more effectively and in a higher quality way. So those are really the two main areas, brands and I would say tech-enabled centralization that we've brought to the multifamily industry in the United States.
So technology is pretty key to what you're providing.
It's essential, and I would say that when many people hear technology in real estate, they either think of shiny gadgets on the wall, or they think of mobile apps in the hands of renters, and we have some of that stuff, although I would say that is perhaps less impactful than perhaps some of the buzz around it. But where there is massive lift of technology is on the back of house, on the operational side. How do we make lease administration more efficient? How do we make ticket routing and handling when somebody submits an issue about a building? How do we prioritize those issues? How do we aggregate that data and make that data and use that data to understand our tenants better, understand who's going to churn, who's going to renew, and then automate that renewal process in a more effective way? How do we project rent growth? How do we project occupancy? There are a lot of ways that technology can really improve returns on the back of house side that I think personally are more impactful than on the consumer side.
That's interesting, because you're right. There is, people talk about, these exciting apps that tenants can use, and can do all sorts of wonderful things for them. But it's the sort of less sexy back of house that's probably more important. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about the brand side of things, because I believe Common now has 3 brands. It seems to be growing quite fast, so it might be more by now. But you set up Kin as a JV with Tishman Spa just 2019. In fact, just before we went into the pandemic, and I think that focuses on families living in cities with children, which is something which probably co-living had not catered for very much. How's that been going?
Yeah, so Common has 3 brands. Common is our first brand, our main brand that's really focused on young professionals. We do all of our co-living under the Common brand. That is the largest of the 3 brands. But we created over the past years 2 additional brands to serve other audiences. The First is NOAA, which is our workforce housing brand. A majority of multifamily in the United States is considered workforce housing, tend to be lower rise, suburban, garden style assets, targeting people who make around the area median income. So these are apartments for nurses, for police, for firefighters, and they tend to be underappreciated and underloved in the broader multifamily sector. I think it's important to note that the United States, unlike the UK, does not have a large social housing sector. It's very, very underdeveloped in the US. And in many cases, workforce housing serves the role in the US that social housing serves in the UK, even though it is privately owned and privately operated. So we started NOAA as our workforce housing brand to bring some of that technology, some of that efficiency to these workforce housing projects. They tend to be very, overall, tend to be very, I don't want to say poorly managed, but let's say, the books are kept with a box of receipts in the closet. Tends to be how these workforce housing projects are run. So we started that actually, it was a real estate partner, one of our owners came to us and said, I've been working with Common on the co-living side for years, would love to bring Common in to manage our workforce housing as well. And so that's been a real success. We rolled out across the Mid-Atlantic last year. This year we expanded to Boston with a portfolio of 6 workforce housing assets in April. So that's been a real growth area.
I think, sorry, Brad, I was just going to say, we use the expression key worker in the UK, which I think equates to what you refer to as workforce. So it's it's the policemen and nurses and firemen, all the essential people who find it very hard to afford to live in city centres. Yeah,
absolutely. And our third brand is Millie. We actually rebranded recently, Kin to Millie, and that was really started seeing a need. I mean, I mentioned earlier I have 2 young children. It's challenging to raise children in a city, and one of the things that makes it easier is being around other families and seeing the benefits of raising kids in a family-oriented environment. So we have 4 buildings now under the Millie brand, and some of the offerings there are units that are designed with families in mind. Many of those buildings have daycare in the amenity space, things like date night drop off, children's oriented programming. So there are a lot of things that the Millie brand brings to benefit families.
And have you thought about later living?
It's interesting. We look at it, and it's something we've talked about internally. There are some great operators in the senior housing space that we don't have a thesis yet for how we do that better. We have to have a lot of conviction when we go into a new brand, when we go into a new sector, that there's a need for us to be there, that there's an opportunity for us to fundamentally do it better, to transform it in a positive way, both on the owner side and on the renter side. And we don't have that conviction yet in the later living space. But it's something that we're interested in, and it's clearly a high growth sector.
And in terms of expansion, you seem to be expanding pretty rapidly at the moment. Although I was thinking, like a year back, at the start of the pandemic, it must have been quite challenging, when people were nervous about sharing space with other people. But I mean, did that in any way inhibit your growth?
Yeah, I would say there was, certainly in the second quarter of last year, going into the third quarter, there were a lot of question marks about co-living. I mean, is this an area, is this a way people want to live? We clearly, given the cities we were in, saw a big dip in occupancy. I think it bottomed out a little bit below 80% occupancy in late Q2. So there were a lot of questions around co-living. Is this an area people want to live? That recovered fairly quickly. We're back to the low to mid 90s occupancy today. We're seeing people come back to cities. The affordability promise of co-living, that hasn't changed. People still want an affordable place to live. They want something that's high quality. They want something that's in a great neighborhood. That hasn't changed at all. What we did see is the construction lending market really did slow down overall and around co-living. That is starting to come back. We're starting to see projects get financed again, but that's probably been the slowest to recover from the pandemic.
And you obviously sort of moving to different cities in the States. Are you looking to expand internationally?
We are, yes. I mentioned earlier that there really aren't, I would say, many third-party property managers at any kind of scale operating in the UK and in continental Europe and overall today. So we are actually, in June, we're going to have our first team members on the ground in London, really focused on better understanding the market and paving a path for our expansion to Europe. So we're very excited about that. We've been very US and to some extent Canada focused. Today we have a few signed projects in Canada, in both Toronto and Ottawa. So Europe is really the next growth area for us.
That's exciting. We will look forward to seeing you over here. And just you're talking about the the knock-on effect of the pandemic, and much of this started before COVID, but there are a lot of buildings that now require repurposing. So particularly on the retail side, are you seeing the conversion of hospitality and offices to residential, and how's that looking?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of it. It's been, I mentioned earlier that COVID has been somewhat challenging from a co-living standpoint, although that's coming back. It's been great from an overall property management standpoint because a lot of owners are thinking about the role of technology. They're looking to repurpose assets. They're really thinking hard about what the future looks like. And they're coming to us. And, one of the things about Common that's important to note is, we're not just a management firm. We actually have a built-in design capability as well. So we're really integrated with about 20 architects and designers on staff. And that kind of gives us that feedback loop of taking data from the operations and incorporating them into the design. It's a great conversation to have between the architects on our team and the operators. What I would say is on the conversion side, on the hospitality conversions, we're seeing a lot of those, a lot of hotel to residential conversions. We'll see how that, as things start recovering, as travel returns, how much of those we continue to see. Offices and retail tend to have their, we see a lot of interest there. They tend to be challenging from a conversion standpoint. The floor plates are often wrong. The offices have very deep floor plates. So converting to residential, you end up either with very funky shaped units or a high loss factor. They also often don't have the right mechanical. You need to redo the HVAC, the electric, the water, the sewer. It's all tricky. So in many cases, we see office owners saying, hey, we looked into it. We'd be better off building from scratch. And so the repurposing narrative is it's exciting, but there's deep challenges to it.
Yes, and it's it's a shame to have to contemplate tearing down and rebuilding, if only just from the sustainability point of view. And also, one of the things that's come out of COVID and the lockdown is a different way of living and working, and increased remote working. And I just wondered whether that's made you reflect on the way you design your units, because people are now thinking they need somewhere to work in addition to somewhere to live.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been funny. I always said for many years, people would ask me if we were going into co-working, because people in many ways conflated co-living and co-working or combined them. And I would say, no, we're residential focused. We're focused on the residential experience. Office is a different sector. We don't want to get into that. And then COVID made a liar out of me, because suddenly, whether you wanted to or not, if you were operating residential buildings, you were also running office space because everyone was working out of our buildings. So we really looked at that on two layers. First is, the buildings we have, and we have to, you can't necessarily go in and change the unit configurations. So it's really about how do you offer quality working space in those suites or in those buildings. And so one thing we've been doing is taking leasing offices, taking any excess space in the building and converting it to working space for the tenants, just to give them a space to get out of their rooms, get out of their units, go somewhere, plug in, and get some work done. So that's been a big initiative of ours. As we think about designs going forward, we've been incorporating a lot more kind of 1+ dens, units that have some dedicated working space, slightly larger bedrooms in co-living units, because we do believe that remote work is here to stay. That COVID is going to be more or less over pretty soon, but people will either be fully remote or in some sort of hybrid situation, working from home 1 to 2 days a week for a longer period of time. So we are thinking about that from a design standpoint when we work with owners.
And I also saw that you've put out an RFP for remote work hubs, and that you have now got some potential sites that you're looking at.
Yeah, so we this is something we did about a year ago. We kind of when everyone was trying to figure out what was happening with COVID and with the future of remote work, we said, hey, there's a big part of this that's here to stay, that there are going to be more permanently remote workers, people who can live and work in wherever. And so the job of economic development that cities have to do, where it was previously about recruiting a headquarters or recruiting a factory, now it's about recruiting individual workers. How can you make a city appealing to someone who can work from wherever? So we sort of flipped the model on its head and said, let's create a number of remote work hubs, places that are affordable, that are designed for living and working, that have high-speed internet, that have access to great amenities, and market those to our audience. I mentioned earlier, 25,000 people a month apply to live at Common. Let's market those to those audiences of people who could live anywhere, but maybe need a little guidance, want to try out a city for 3 months. So we got 28 applicants of public-private partnerships, so governments in partnership with developers. We vetted those and picked 5 winners. Really wanted to get a diversity of different places, different cities. And they're all going through the development process now. The first one will open at the end of this year, early next year. That one's an adaptive reuse one in Rochester, New York. And we have 4 others that are ground up in New Orleans, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Ogden, Utah, and Bentonville, Arkansas. It was US focused, but we're excited to do more outside the US as well.
No, it's exciting because it's probably not something that one would have thought of, year and a half ago.
Right.
But that's the way things are going. And as part of Common, you talk about the need to create communities, and I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how you do that, and whether you think it's something that property companies are doing, whether they're doing it in the same way as you.
Yeah, so it was one of our values from the very beginning. We had 3 values that we believe renters are looking for that are missing in rental properties today. The first, which I mentioned quite a bit, is affordability. The second is convenience. And the third is community. And those, different renters want them in different proportions. So, we survey our renters on a regular basis and say, hey, of these three value propositions, what do you rank most highly? It always varies. Some people say, hey, we're coming for the community. We want to come to events. We want to get to know people. Others are like, hey, I just need an affordable place to live. So the community, it can't be too in your face. It can't be like, oh, you have to come to this event. You have to buy into this set of values. But it's particularly given that more than half of our tenants are coming from someplace else. They're coming to a city for the first time. That just getting to know your neighbors, like being in a warm and welcoming environment. We've seen a huge increase in renewal rate if someone makes a friend outside of their suite in the first 2 weeks of living at Common. So there are a lot of benefits to just, community tends to be a very fuzzy word. A lot of people use it in a lot of ways. I just look at it as warm and welcoming environment and opportunities to meet new people.
It sounds pretty good. And are you seeing a younger generation of people who are choosing to rent as a lifestyle choice, or do you think that's a myth and they buy if they could?
It's tough to understand the revealed preference there. You certainly see a lot of people looking for the things that come with, the rental experience, the flexibility. A lot of people aren't ready to settle down and say, hey, this is where I want to live long term. This is the unit, the apartment I want to own. So you see a lot of people, particularly kind of under 40, that are looking for that. But you also see more empty nesters, more people whose kids have moved out saying, hey, this house this apartment is weighing me down. It's tying me to a given place. It's too much space. I want to move into a rental experience, live in an urban center, see something different. So you kind of see it on both ends of the age curve of people preferring not the financial structure of renting, but the flexibility that comes with renting, the experience, the quality of a lot of new build rental product. So you certainly see that in renter preferences.
It's interesting because, as we discussed earlier, the build to rent sector in the UK is relatively new. So the choices just haven't been there, and rental has been, in the past, very much a sort of amateur sector. So it's good that we now have that. And you've mentioned affordability and the difficulty of finding a good product that's affordable. What can cities do to make housing more affordable? Because it seems to be an endemic problem in so many cities.
Well, I think the easiest answer, which is, I believe fundamentally true, is they can build more housing. You look at it across the board in the cities that have been able to maintain affordability are those that allow a lot of different types of housing to get built. I love using Seattle as an example because Seattle faces a lot of similar challenges to San Francisco and other cities that have had major job booms, but have come to a very different outcome. So San Francisco obviously has some of the most expensive rents and housing anywhere in the world. Seattle is also a major tech hub. It's not quite what San Francisco is, but it's solidly number 2 or number 3 in the United States in terms of tech job growth. Companies like Amazon, like Zillow, are hiring tens of thousands of people in Seattle. Yet Seattle, unlike San Francisco, has a much more liberal zoning code. They are much more aggressive about building transit. They are more aggressive about enabling people to build housing. So we manage, I mentioned earlier, about 800 micro apartments in Seattle. That's not a product you could legally build in most other places in the United States. We manage some micro apartments that are 25 square meters. And that's a full unit in 25 square meters. and that rents for around 1,000 to 1,100 a month in a prime, well-located neighborhood in a high-quality building. And there are not many other cities that are experiencing the kind of tech-enabled job growth that Seattle is, that you can get those rents. That similar unit in San Francisco would probably rent for $2,000 a month. So they've been able to maintain affordability because they've built, and they've been very open to encouraging growth, building transit into new areas to unlock additional housing supply. And obviously a lot of cities in the center of the country, places like Houston, like Dallas, that have also been very aggressive about growth. I would say they've done so in a bit more of a sprawly way, that has generated a lot of issues in terms of car traffic, in terms of pollution, but have also been able to maintain affordability just by going out, out, out.
Yes, I think in planning terms, there'd be a lot of resistance, certainly in London, to micro apartments, and I think that's one of the issues. The planners talk about bed sits. They don't necessarily understand what the co-living product is, and can be concerned about just having sort of small apartments.
Yeah, it's certainly something. A concern we hear, and one of the reasons we focus on quality, on amenitization, is to just demonstrate and give examples of what this product is. And once people see it, once they walk it, it makes a lot more sense. I think it's one of those things that, in theory, sounds really challenging. In practice, is really well designed, is providing a housing option that wasn't there before, and that is meeting a real need for someone who otherwise would be living an hour outside the city. So it's something that we really encourage people to tour the product, to understand, and compare to kind of what the status quo is.
Yes, I think with the focus on the concept of the 50-minute city, not wanting people to drive in cities, maybe we have to revisit space standards, because something has to give, doesn't it? So is there any reason why a property company shouldn't launch its own consumer co-living brand? I mean, I suppose some landlords are trying to do it. Is that something that property companies can do, do you think?
Well, I think one of the challenges, as I mentioned earlier, is scale. Most developers are not able to reach a level of scale to actually get traction on a bespoke brand. So unless you're talking about, many thousands of units in many different cities in a pretty short period of time, and a very aggressive marketing campaign to go against that brand, it's really tough to get any traction against a new brand. Common spends, we spend millions of dollars a year in marketing at the brand level to build awareness for what we're doing at Common, and get traction outside of individual cities. So we don't just want people in New York to know about Common in New York. We want people in Ohio to know about Common in New York. We want people in Europe to know about Common in New York, because a lot of them, certainly prior to COVID, would come here to study, to take an internship, what have you. So there are benefits to having a brand that has real reach and real penetration. Look at the hospitality sector. There's a reason why a lot of hotel owners have decided to work with one of the major operators. They have that traction, they have that brand reach, they have the built-in audience. And we see a similar trend on the rental sector. Similar with operations. There are real benefits of scale. It's very tough to run a one-off handful of buildings. So we do believe that the UK will trend more in the direction of the US of consolidation on the management side.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the importance of brand and bringing in an operator with a good brand also now affecting the office sector. So it's something that is now common, if you'll excuse the pun, to various parts of the real estate sector. So, well, I have to say, I very much look forward to Common coming to the UK, and it will be great to see your product over here.
Thank
so,
you.
Brad, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to meet you in London.
I would love that. I will be there this summer.
Look forward to it.
Sounds great. Take care, Susan. Thank you.
But it was really fascinating to hear from Brad Hargreaves about the rapid growth of Common and the rollout of their new co-living brands. It looks as if we're going to be seeing Common in the UK very soon. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please join us for the next Propertyshe podcast interview coming very soon. The Propertyshe podcast is brought to you by Mishcon de Reya in association with the London Real Estate Forum, and can be found at mishcon.com/propertyshe, along with all our interviews and programme notes. The podcasts are also available to subscribe to on your Apple Podcast app and on Spotify and whatever podcast app you use. Do continue to subscribe and let us have your feedback and comments, and most importantly, suggestions for future guests. And of course, you can continue to follow me on Twitter at Propertyshe and on LinkedIn for a very regular commentary on all things real estate, prop tech, and the built environment.